Welcome back to the Postpartum Plan podcast. This podcast is designed to support and empower you through postpartum. Whether you're expecting, in the early postpartum days, or beyond, this space is for you. I'm your host, Madison Fugere, a dedicated postpartum doula and pediatric sleep consultant, striving to help parents feel confident and supported in their parenting journey. Each week, I'm sharing practical tips and expert advice to help you navigate all the postpartum things with confidence. Well, as much confidence as you can. Let's embark on this journey together, making your parenthood as serene and supportive as possible. For today's episode, I'm joined by Sarah, who's a birth and postpartum doula, as well as the host of the Entering Motherhood podcast. I am super excited to have her here today because she gets to talk a little bit about her personal experience with her own births, including a VBAC, as well as her experience as a birth doula and postpartum doula, supporting families who have also experienced VBACs. So we're going to talk all the things about them today. So whether you have experienced one yourself or want to, this is going to be chock full of information. So thank you for joining, and let's get into it. I'm super excited to have you with me today, Sarah. Thank you for joining me.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here.
It's going to be a blast. I love that we're just kind of rolling with the punches. Before we hit record here, we had like one vision, and now we're kind of like doing a little bit of a 180 with a different topic and like just rolling with the punches. So hopefully everyone enjoys today's topic. But I'm excited to have you here and to kind of dive into things. But before we do you want to tell everybody a little bit more about yourself and kind of how you got into the world that you are in now?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, I am Sarah Bilger. I also have a podcast called Entering Motherhood, and I am located in Greenville, South Carolina, and I am a birth and postpartum doula. And I got into the doula world and the birth world because I essentially became obsessed with it after the birth of my own child. And I was just completely enthralled by everything birth and postpartum and all the information that I could possibly find out. And so with that and doing all the research and finding out all this information, I kind of just decided like, let's get certified in this. And I wanted to know as much information as I could to prepare for my second birth because my first ended up being unplanned cesarean. And so then, kind of leading into what we were talking about before we hit record, like my story then from there was preparing for a VBAC and then ultimately having a completely unmedicated vaginal birth after cesarean.
So amazing. Like, I love that. Yeah. And like I said, we did kind of like a little bit of a 180 here. We were going to talk about some like birth prep kind of stuff, but then we decided that kind of chatting about VBAC could kind of be a combination of both, right? Because we were saying how it really is VBAC prep starts right after that cesarean, thinking about, okay, like I don't want to have another cesarean if I have another baby. Do I have to have another cesarean if I have another baby? And then obviously it then leads all the way up to actually having that next child. And so it can be a really long process for some people emotionally. And so I think kind of touching upon it today and being able to kind of myth bust some of those things, because I do think the moment that you hear that you have a cesarean, that first time that you're going to, or after you have that baby, you just assume that like, okay, well, this is the path for me now, right? And that doesn't have to be the truth. So I'm super excited that you brought up this topic and that we're gonna, get into all of it. So that's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. And like that was very much my story. I kind of, I went in with my first pregnancy thinking I'm just gonna pop this baby out and that's gonna be it. And it didn't go that way. And so from that point, I was, determined. I knew that we wanted more kids. And I said, well, how can I have a vaginal birth? And I was, up against a lot of different things, even initially provider saying, why would you ever want to put yourself through all of that again? You're probably going to end up in the same situation. Like, oh, sure, like we'll consider it, like whatever it might be. And, then you have like friends and family that are just scared because they have also been told once a cesarean, always a cesarean, and it's risky and all these things. So, I mean, yeah. whatever we get into today, I know is going to be helpful for those that are kind of in that same situation and
Yeah.
position of just wanting to know what's out there and what their options are.
Right, absolutely. And there are so many statistics and myths to it because you, like you said, you're up against a lot. And everybody has an opinion on everything when it comes to babies and pregnancy as a whole. And then you add like VBAC as a topic is probably one of those top things that everyone has something to say, right? Whether it's, oh my gosh, I can't believe you had a cesarean, you need to have an unmedicated vaginal birth, or it's, a family member who had a cesarean and is like, yeah, I had all my kids via cesarean. Why don't you just do that? Like, and everybody has their own opinion to it. And I think it can be really overwhelming and like tricky for some people to recognize, yeah, like you just have to really pick what you think you're most comfortable with and really dive into that and trust yourself for it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it is like saying like what you want because there's also like the side of maybe you had a planned cesarean or maybe it was a breech presentation and you couldn't find a provider that kind of felt comfortable going that route, and so you had the cesarean and you're like, well, it wasn't that bad, and you think like maybe in the future I am going to have like cesareans moving forward. But I always just say like, you know really think about what your options are and know that you do have different possibilities and different outcomes available to you, and it doesn't have to just be one road. But if you want to go whichever route you
Right.
go, it's one of those things. But I think most women that are going for a VBAC, it's like you're very determined and you want
Yes.
that vaginal birth. It's not just like, oh, let me just try again.
Yeah. No, I think for sure. I think a lot of people do. Um, assume that they have to have a cesarean and they just kind of go with it and they come to terms with that. Or it is like a very determined, no, I wanted to have a vaginal delivery and I'm going to find a way to have my vaginal delivery. And I love the point that you said. I say it with like everything, but it's like one of those things where like if it's working for you, great. Like if you want to have a cesarean, great. But like if you don't, there are resources and ways to be able to get you to the goals that you want to get to. So if you want a vaginal delivery, then that is something that can be worked upon and can be accomplished, right? And you're here to be a statistic of one of them. You have to find the right providers, you have to be set up in the right scenarios, and that's kind of where I think I would love to kind of jump into it. So if somebody's listening and has either just had a cesarean and is like in where you were of like, oh, we know we want to have more kids. I don't know if I want to go through the cesarean again, or what are my options, right? Where should we start? Where can people kind of start to think about, okay, if I wanted to have another kiddo and I don't want to have a cesarean, what should they be looking for to start?
Yeah, I think looking at your cesarean birth and saying like what was the circumstances. Like I mentioned breech presentation. If, you had a breech baby and you couldn't find a provider that was willing to go down that route or whatever it might be, you are an excellent candidate for a VBAC because the possibility of you having a breech baby again, unless there's, some sort of um what is it called? Um, like uterine structure
Oh,
going on.
I was trying to figure out where you were going
Um,
with it. Okay, there we
yeah.
go.
Yes.
Yep.
Like unless there's something with the shape of your uterus where it's more likely that you are bound to have a baby in the breech presentation, then the likelihood of that happening again is not that high. So you are, very close to, being able to have that head down baby
Yeah.
vaginal delivery. But then, like looking at different other situations, and saying like, was it this like crazy emergent situation and the scar is, compromised or whatever it might be? Do you have some sort of special scar? What kind of like was the circumstance of your cesarean,
Yep.
and then really analyzing that. You can request your op report. You can talk to your provider
Mhm.
of what exactly happened, how could this have been different, or is there anything that I could kind of position myself differently moving forward. And so
Mhm.
really just starting with that experience and learning from it and analyzing it and also healing from that.
I was just gonna
And
say that. I was like,
yes.
it's an emotional thing too. So I think if
Hmm.
people are listening, especially in like early postpartum, like I know for a lot of people it's emotional. A lot of people don't go into birth thinking they're going to have a cesarean, and a lot of the time, especially with first kiddos, right? And so it can be really traumatizing in whatever way for a lot of people. So I think, yeah, making sure that whenever you decide to go over this or look into it and kind of reflect, making sure that you also have support systems in place is like so important.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even if it's just talking with your partner or a
Hmm.
friend and starting there, getting comfortable, sharing your story, talking about what happened, asking questions, getting curious, and really just, yeah, healing from that experience and learning from that experience and just trying to analyze a little bit of what happened and see if any of that played a factor into why you might not be able to have one,
Right.
have a vaginal birth moving forward.
Right. And I think that there are, like you said, I mean, we could spend hours and hours sitting here talking about all the different opportunities and options of things that could have happened or could not have happened. So we don't need to dive into that too deep. But yes, I think like recognizing what happened and like what's the likelihood of that happening again, and did that really affect you being able to have a vaginal delivery, or was that just a repercussion to something like a breech baby or whatever it may be? I think is a really great place to start because you're very like factual based when it comes to those types of things, right? It's not about an emotional outcome, even though it may feel emotional thinking about it, right? You're
Yeah.
literally talking about, okay, what happened? Let's go through these steps and like physically look at what happened this last time and what is likely to or to not happen next time, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And if you feel ready, going into that 6 week postpartum visit and asking those questions or seeing just how your provider responds to those questions. Because
Hmm.
I vividly remember going in at my 6 week appointment, holding my baby and saying, like, what does this mean moving forward? And they had just said to me, you can have as many cesareans as you want. And I was like, but I want a vaginal birth. And it was just kind of like this pushback. And I think I knew then that that wasn't going to be the provider that I had
Hmm.
next time, but it still took
Right.
me a little bit to be able to switch because I think sometimes we get very hooked on, well, this is my provider. I spent a lot of time finding this
Right.
person. Like it's not that I had a horrible experience,
Right.
but it's one of those things. And ultimately, I ended up once I got pregnant with my second, I was about 20 weeks pregnant when I switched to a
Mm.
different provider. And so just knowing that like you can switch providers, that it's
Yeah.
quite all right. They're not going to be offended if you feel like you need to search elsewhere. And you need to find somebody that is aligned with your vision and supports you and you feel comfortable with.
Right. And I think that was literally going to be the second thing that I was going to go into is like, yeah, I think providers are going to be kind of that next step, right? Is looking at what kind of like support were you getting and what type of responses were you getting. And I think your point of people get comfortable is so true. I think just as society, like in the world that we live in, we're just creatures of habit. And so seeing the same person from your first birth control pill through to your second child is very normal for people who aren't moving around, right? And so you do because you create relationships and whatnot. But I think like what you just said of remembering that providers shouldn't be upset if you're deciding to go with somebody else because there's going to be a different provider for every type of person. And at the end of the day, like you're the one that's hiring them to support you. You're not hiring them as a best friend, right? Like so
Yeah.
so finding somebody that's going to help you get to whatever goal that you want to get to is so important. Do you have things that you were looking for or that you tell people to look for when they're looking for a new provider if a VBAC is something that they're looking into trying to accomplish?
Yeah, definitely look at their cesarean rates, look at, their VBAC rates, kind of ask them what happens if I go past 41 weeks? What happens if I go past 42 weeks? What are we looking at? How does induction work? Like you can really start asking these questions very early on
Yep.
and go through just what if scenarios and just see
Hmm.
how they respond. Like they don't have to have a definite answer, but try to look for an answer that you feel connected to,
Yep.
aligned with, and it doesn't have to be a perfect, oh yes, we do exactly this and this is how it would go because
Right.
it's
Things are
so
always
unpredictable.
changing.
Yeah, it's always changing, but just see how they're responding to it. See if
Hmm.
they're getting, snippy with it or saying like, "Oh, like I don't really know," or we'd have to see. Like if they're very vague and
Hmm.
just kind of like pushing you off, then maybe that's not going to be a great provider. But again, it's
Hmm.
like root back to just the feeling and like, do you feel safe with them? Do you
Yeah,
feel like they are going to be rooting for you? And
absolutely.
yeah,
I know. And I think so. Well, two questions for you. One, you kind of mentioned talking about like C-section rates and VBAC rates with them. I know as somebody who doesn't do birth work, right? And as somebody might be listening who isn't like a medically type person or maybe hasn't talked about that kind of stuff with their provider, but is now looking for that, what kind of rates are typical rates that we're like looking for in, the States? I know the rates
yeah.
obviously are going to vary very greatly. But, are we talking about like 50% C-section rates or are we talking about like 8% C-section rates? What kind of numbers are the averages that we're seeing when we're talking to providers?
Yeah,
Do you know?
so on average in the United States, it's about 30% right now for cesarean rate.
Okay.
And then a good, I would say like VBAC provider is probably 80, maybe even like closer to 90% success rate. Because if they're having those individuals come and those vaginal births are, successful, then most of the time, like I said, like unless there's certain circumstances or placental situations and
Hmm.
things like that, it should be around 80%, I would say,
Okay.
of people that are trying to go for a vaginal birth after cesarean are successful.
Okay. That's great to know. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it can be so overwhelming to know like, okay, what do we look for and like what are we comparing it to? And I could totally imagine a bunch of people listening to us saying this and then going to Google and like who the heck knows what Google's gonna say. So that's great to know. The
Yeah.
other thing I was gonna mention with providers, which I don't know if it's the same kind of around you, but some of the towns that I live around are very like mom Facebook group heavy. And in a lot of the groups, I'll see people, asking for recommendations for different types of things. And, you
Hmm.
scroll those comments and you're getting like true, genuine answers. And so I feel like places like that, as much as it might get a little catty, might be a good place to kind of ask because I think you will probably get some very like real responses, right? I know I haven't heard about VBACs specifically if I think about like I can't think of a instance off the top of my head seeing them, but I've seen a lot of people being like, "Hey, I'm looking for a new OB-GYN, like where should I
Yep.
be looking?" And people are like very quick to like tell you where they love or where they hate, which is like very helpful to help kind of narrow the list down too. So I would say probably looking somewhere like that is going to give you probably quick information rather than having to
Hmm.
interview like a bunch of people as well, right?
Yeah. And also, teaming up with a doula
Yeah.
that might be, specifically trained in VBAC or, used to doing VBACs, things like
Hmm.
that. That is one thing that I do locally here that I absolutely love. If there's a VBAC mama, I am like, come under my wing, like, let's go.
Yeah.
Like, there are certain providers that I absolutely love for VBAC.
Hmm.
I think the Greenville area in general is very birthy. We have, a whole plethora of different birth doulas and
I love
postpartum
that.
doulas and midwives and birth centers. And, we even have midwives that can be in the hospital and just amazing OB practices as well. So it's really cool because I had moved here before even having children, not knowing anything of it.
Yeah.
And now I am like fully immersed in the birth world. And it's
Oh,
really cool that we are so um big here because I hear, other people that I connect with, either, Instagram or like, friends, families that are
Yeah,
like elsewhere. And they're like, I don't know if we have any doulas here, or like,
right.
oh, like we don't have any midwives.
It's crazy. It's so
Yeah.
crazy. It's like one of those, like, the theory of like, you don't think anybody has the same new car as you do until you get it and then you start looking around. Sometimes I wonder about that. And I'm like, okay, are there really this many doulas and like birthy folk out here? Or am I just like really immersed in it and just didn't know it existed before? But
Right.
it is one of those things. Once you find one person, they're going to connect you to a whole circle of people that you probably don't even
Yes.
realize exist around you.
Yes.
So I love that. Yes, connecting with doulas is huge. Um, and you can really, again, Google and find one person and end up connecting with so many more. So definitely feel free to reach out to either of us. I'm sure we can connect you with like places to check
Yes.
out doulas.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. Yeah. And I think that kind of connects us to another thing people can do, which is hiring a doula or getting some prenatal and kind of like birth support in whatever way. Especially like I know there's a lot of different classes people can take and education. Working with a doula who has VBAC expertise can also kind of
Hmm.
help you to prepare in some prenatal ways, right? To kind of help you
Yeah.
prepare for that actual birth too. Are there specific things you do with your VBAC clients? That tend to help them or you find create better success rates? Hey guys, it's Madison. Yeah, I'm here interrupting myself, but I wanted to take a minute to talk about something that can feel so overwhelming as a parent: sleep. So, if you are in the thick of the sleepless nights, struggling to figure out how to get your baby and yourself to get more rest, then I want you to know that you're not alone. Here's the thing: if what you're doing is working for you, great, keep doing it. But if it's not, there are resources to help, and I'm happy to be one of them. As a certified pediatric sleep consultant, I work with families to create personalized sleep plans that actually make sense for your current and unique situation. No cookie cutter advice, just practical strategies that match your parenting style and your child's personality. Because let's be real, sleep is not a luxury, it is a necessity. So, if you're ready to make a change, I'd love to help. You can book a free sleep connection call on my website, www.serenemomentsdoula.com, or reach out to me on Instagram at serenemoments.doula.
Yeah, so I'm huge on scar massage. So, once you are at the point that you can be a little bit more mobile with your incision and that you're feeling more comfortable, you can just slowly start to, just feel it out and just like desensitize it and just like get used to the mobility of it. And what we want is eventually to have that elasticity back, really that mobility of it, so that when our uterus does grow and expand again, we have that elasticity to it, and that it is, giving way, and that you are, fully mobile in that scar region. So scar massage is really great. Also cupping, which is like sort of
Yeah.
like a way of like scar massage. You can have that done. You can, do it yourself. You can look up videos of just how to do scar massage. Most pelvic floor therapists
Mm-hmm.
also are trained in this. So
Yep.
you can go and get cupping done, you can get scar massage done, and they can really just analyze your incision and the mobility of it. So I think that really goes a long way.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, just like processing your birth and really just kind of fully being ready for what's to come, and knowing that your situation is different, but it's still birth. It's
Right.
still um, an experience that is like anybody else. And I think a lot of the times we think VBAC has to be this like huge, different, elaborate thing. And oh, I've had this cesarean before. And like I usually say, it's kind of like unless you had a vaginal birth and then a cesarean and now you're trying for a vaginal birth again, it's almost as if you're just trying for a birth for the first time again.
Yeah.
If you had a situation where it was emergent before you even started pushing or anything like that, if you were never even in labor and you had, a scheduled cesarean and you don't know what that is going to be like, really just, education again and
Yeah.
informing yourself on what this is going to look like, how do I want this to be, and
Right.
almost essentially going through that birth preparation again for the first time.
hmm
So,
Especially if it's been a while, right? And things are constantly changing. And I think that remembering that point that you just said of like, not everybody has had the labor, not everybody has had the actual like contractions and the pushing aspect of trying to have a vaginal delivery because sometimes other things come into play. And so you go right to a cesarean, or you only have the early labor stages of things and then you end up with a cesarean, or you do the labor, but you don't end up pushing. Like whatever it may be,
hmm.
your body's going to experience something that you haven't experienced before. And so, yeah, re-educating and making sure that you're kind of feeling confident going into it. I think probably mindset is huge, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of those things like, if you're just in that, immediate postpartum period and you're just like, what in the world happened and how could I ever have a vaginal birth or what would that look like? I think it's just like all those racing thoughts and like just building up your mindset, building up your, confidence and empowerment feeling and really being ready to step into it and know like you have options and that this is possible and
Yeah,
it is safe. It is safe, like 100%. Like obviously there's circumstances, but circumstances come with any birth.
right.
So I think just remembering that and really looking at what the statistics are or what they're, you know, fearing you with and
Right, right. What
what
information are you being told and
right.
how fact
Yeah.
checked have you done to it too,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's awesome. And yeah, I think that really kind of that mental prepare and making sure you're surrounded by people that can support you is like such a huge part to any birth, but especially if it's something that, you're really trying to be super passionate about trying to accomplish, right?
Yeah.
Making sure that you and your partner and your support systems are kind of all on the same page. Um, is so important. I think there's also something to say, I think we should probably touch upon before we wrap is like, okay, we can try for a vaginal delivery, but then there are the possible circumstances that, you end up with a breech baby again, and you don't want to do a breech delivery, right? And you end up with another C-section. And obviously the goal is to not do that, right? We want a high success rate. But I think that remembering also that like it's not a bad thing. And going back to like what you were saying earlier, like you still gave birth if you had a C-section, right? Like you're still a parent even if you had a C-section. Because I think sometimes when things go wrong with whatever aspect of birth planning, right, it can be really, really emotional and really traumatizing for a lot of people when they're super headstrong and super passionate about trying to get a
Hmm.
certain outcome, right? And so I think again, making sure you're surrounding yourself with people that are there to support you and your goals, but also like there to support you first, right? In whatever happens, because I think that it can be really upsetting sometimes, understandably, if things don't go exactly to plan, whether that be with a VBAC or really with any birth, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think, like exactly to your point and just saying like really working on that mindset and really working on that, idea of whatever way it pans out is something that I am okay with. And that can take a lot of work. And, I've had clients, I had one client specifically, and she had a cesarean. She was going for a VBAC after two cesareans and she ended up with her third cesarean, but it was very healing for her and it
Mm-hmm.
was very redemptive in its own way because she felt so much more in control, empowered, aware of all of the things that were going on.
Right.
And she was very much at peace with it. She was like, this is okay
Yeah,
because I know that I did all the things that
as
I
you
could.
could. Right.
And I think really like having that mindset, like I don't want to necessarily say like positive mindset or like everything has to
Right.
be like, oh, like rainbows and butterflies. And it is, what I want this vaginal birth and that's the only thing that's going to happen. Like really just being like open and aware of all different outcomes and
Yeah.
situations and knowing that like, you made the decisions and you were in control and that you felt good with the choices that you made.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, yeah, obviously we want everybody to get everything that they want, but in a real world society and in real world situations, babies are going to do what babies are going to do. So, yeah, remembering that there can be different outcomes and yeah, I think that that's so happy. He like makes my heart feel happy to hear that, people are, even if she did experience her third cesarean and that wasn't initially her plan, like it can be really, really healing to feel like you have some control over a situation, especially if you felt as though you didn't have that control for the
Yeah.
times before. So
Yeah.
that's really awesome to hear. Well, thank you for joining me. I really appreciate you joining and sharing this kind of information. Hopefully, some people feel a little
Yeah.
empowered and they feel confident in, asking for what they're looking for following births if they've had a cesarean and want to try for a VBAC. So, thank you for bringing this topic up and for joining me and educating everybody. All of Sarah's information will be in the show notes below. Definitely go check out her podcast and get in touch with her if you're in the area and are looking for some birthy support. Thanks for joining me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Postpartum Plan podcast. I hope that today's episode brought you support, relatability, and valuable insight. Remember, you're not alone on this journey. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave a review and share with any of your prenatal and postpartum friends and family. Your feedback helps us reach more parents seeking support. And if you're looking for additional resources, please feel free to connect via Instagram at Serene Moments Doula for constant information, tips, and tricks, or check out my website, www.serenemomentsdoula.com. See you next week.